and I will tell you a little bit about my background. So I grew up in Dallas, Texas, came to Austin to go to UT like so many people, and stayed here after that. I got interested in government and politics actually when I was at UT. I got a part-time job working as a sergeant at arms at the Capitol. And what that meant was basically just running really simple errands for the representatives. From that point on, I had my foot in the door and just kind of worked in different offices and different agencies in the state government while I was at UT. And so I ended up getting a minor in government, major in business. And then as I was getting into my senior year, I thought more about the possibility of going to law school. I had a really great opportunity to work in Washington, D.C. for a summer. And while I was there, a friend got me a job at a law firm. And so in speaking to the interns there, they convinced me rather than going to law school, I should go to the LBJ School of Public Affairs, which is an absolutely phenomenal school at UT. I ended up going there, getting my graduate degree from the LBJ School, and that really shaped my political career. I really never intended to run for office. I figured I would work for state agencies, or after I got into the business world, I would just do that as something on the side to help candidates run for office, things like that. But never say never, because many of the things that I've ended up doing in my life, at one point in time, I said, oh, I would never do that. I remember growing up, my parents were in the business world and owned their own businesses. And I saw how hard my dad worked, said, I will never own my own business. Well, years later, I actually own a real estate company. At one point, I said I would never broker. I said, oh, I would never be my own broker. Years later, I became my own broker. So I also said I would never run for office because I'm not a super outgoing person. But again, here I am now holding office. I ran for the first time in 2018. And the reason I ran for office was I'm very passionate about public education. I really feel like every child in the state, even in the country, should have an opportunity to have an excellent education. And with that comes paying our teachers well, making sure that we have really great teachers with really great experience and education themselves. And so that became my passion. As my kids were growing up, I became involved in the PTA and volunteering with the Austin School District. I kept hearing over and over how our school finance system was broken and how Austin was sending hundreds of millions of dollars to the state. The state was not really keeping up its share of school funding. So that became my passion issue. And as my youngest child became a senior in high school, I felt like it was the time for me to get more involved. We had had the election of 2016. I was crushed by the results of that election. And so in 2017, I started talking to people and figuring out if this was something that I can do. One piece of advice I would give you is never let anybody tell you you can't do what it is you want to do. I had some people say that this is really tough. You have to raise a lot of money. However, I also had a lot of people who encouraged me. And so that encouragement led to my running for office and winning election in 2018 and serving in the Texas House of Representatives, the first session in 2019. So that's a quick introduction of myself. Being a state legislator is a part-time job. We are in session only every other year, and we are in session only for about 6 months of the year. This session is a little bit different, of course, with the pandemic. You can see I am here in my home office, working from home this week. Next week, we will be back on the House floor. But the topic of my discussion today is leadership and bridging the partisan divide, because in order to get things done, in order to pass laws, we have to be able to work with one another, whether we're Republican or Democratic. And of course, right now we have a Republican majority in Texas. Our governor is Republican. Our lieutenant governor is Republican. The speaker, the majority of the Texas House and Senate are Republican. So of course, as a Democrat and as a newer Democrat in the House, I have to learn how to negotiate and work with the Republicans if I have any hope of getting my bills passed. So I'm curious, I wanted to make this somewhat interactive. And so if you would put in the chat, I may have to open my screen so I can see the chat, but I'm going to ask a few questions throughout just to hold your attention. I want to know who can tell me a famous person who graduated from the LBJ school. And if you can't get it, I will give you a clue. So answers in chat. I'm going to give you a few seconds and then I'll give you a clue. So this month is Black History Month. And just the other day, I was posting about Black History Month and I used this person as an example. Okay, I can hear the wheels in your minds churning. She is somebody who worked really hard to register voters in Georgia. Oh, the LBJ school. Somebody says, what is the LBJ school? So the LBJ school is a public affairs, it's a graduate school here at UT. Ah, Stacey Abrams, yay, all right. Jessica got that answer to that question. So that's great. I'm glad that y'all asked the question of what's the LBJ school, because actually there's an LBJ school that's a high school, and so sometimes people get that confused. But the LBJ school is a fabulous graduate program at the University of Texas. So now I'm going to go on. You know, we see ourselves as a very divided society, but in reality, we have a lot more in common with one another than we realize. And it serves our own interests to look out for our neighbors. So I want to start with some slides that show some of the traditions in the Texas House of Representatives and some of the ways that we build relationships that help us bridge the partisan divide. So I see that Jamal has my slideshow, or he's about to get my slideshow going. Who are the top 3 most powerful elected officials of the state of Texas? And you can put it in chat. Well, okay. Somebody said Abbott, Patrick, and Paxton. So Paxton actually is very powerful, but who I was thinking of, the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker. So that would be Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and Speaker Dave Phelan. But I have to say the AG is very powerful. So I forget now who answered it. Yes, Blair. Very good. Good job. Okay, so here is my presentation, Leadership in Bridging the Partisan Divide. We'll go ahead to the next slide that shows one of our House traditions. And so that is your first session when you are presenting your bills. You go up to the front microphone and you can see that's me there at the front microphone. And so the tradition is for all of the incoming class, the freshman class, to stand around and to give support. So there you probably don't know, but generally speaking, the elderly white men are the Republicans, except for Candy Noble, who's also a Republican. And then I'm also surrounded by the Democrats. Not everybody fit into the picture. But it's just a way of showing support. We also have this silly tradition where some of the longer serving members will stand at the opposite end of the room at what we call the back mic, and they will ask us silly questions about our bills. So this particular instance, I had a bill that would have required high school students to take a financial literacy course. You would have to take at least 1 semester of either personal financial literacy or a class called Money Matters, or I think there's another one called Dollars and Cents. Right now, those are optional courses, and A lot of us believe that they are very important courses for young people to have. And so my bill actually passed the House, unanimous. However, when it got to the Senate, it didn't quite make it. And so we're filing the bill again. We've made some changes to it to make it a little bit easier to pass this time around. And so that's just one of the traditions. Another tradition is that we, in the first 60 days, are not allowed to vote on any substantive bills. So that's our time to really get to know one another, to talk to each other about what our priorities are, but also to get to know each other on a personal level, because that's really how you bridge the partisan divide. That's how you get people to understand your perspective, is to just build the relationship with them to begin with. So go ahead on to the next slide. Another thing that we do during the first 60 days, since we aren't able to vote on substantive legislation, is we have what are called resolutions. And so we will bring in groups onto the House floor and kind of appreciate the work that they've done or recognize something special that they have done. This particular instance was when the Lake Travis Future Farmers of America came to the Texas House. And there were many groups that are constituents in my House district who would come up there. Sometimes we would take pictures in the hallway, and that's what we were doing here. Other times I would go and speak to them and again tell them what it's like to serve in the Texas House. And that's one of my favorite jobs, is being able to meet with our young students, just like I'm doing here today. We'll go on to the next slide. Another thing that members of the House do, whether we're Republican or Democrats, is we do service projects. This instance, we were helping out at the Central Texas Food Bank. And we were told that during the summertime, they have so many more mouths to feed, basically. They need a lot more volunteers. And so I got to know the head of the Central Texas Food Bank, Eric Webb. And so he and I kind of brainstormed, and I said, why don't I have a challenge among my fellow legislators here in the Travis County area? And we're gonna have a competition to see which office can do the most service work, who can provide the most volunteer hours. And of course, me and my staff were very motivated, and so we did the most. But just that's something, again, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, doing service projects brings people together and seeing what the community needs and then filling that need. Go ahead on to the next slide. Another way that we get out into the community is by having town halls. And in my district in particular, it's a very split district. It is really very close to 50-50 Democrat and Republican. And so that requires me to get out in the public and let people know what I stand for, and including going out into some of the more conservative areas such as the Lakeway. This particular picture is of me giving a presentation to the Lakeway Men's Breakfast Club. And by the way, all the pictures that you're seeing are from last session. You can see that we're all gathered together like we are not doing at the moment. 95% of them are Republicans. The 5 of us in the room who are Democrats are 4 men and myself. And so, and you can see on the slide up there, I'm talking about the environment, which we don't always see eye to eye with our Republican friends. But, you know, they were very attentive. They were very considerate. And I had a lot of people come up to me afterwards thanking me for making the effort to come out and speak to them. Go ahead to the next slide. Really, people just want to be heard, and it's very important to get out and let them know, even if you don't have the exact same ideas, it's still important to let them know what you believe in. So here's a groundbreaking in Lago Vista. Another thing that public officials do a lot of is going out for these photo ops, groundbreakings for parks, groundbreakings for roads, things like that, for schools. This is a groundbreaking for a new park that's going in Lago Vista. And standing right next to me is the mayor of Lago Vista, who's a Republican. Granted, our city officials aren't partisan offices, but typically the people that hold the offices do have a membership in one party or the other. And he even supported my opponent in the last election, but I still like him. And we still talk on a regular basis, because whether we're in the same party or not, we have to work together. It's very important for our state and city governments to be able to work together. And then panel discussions. It's important to know that as a representative, I don't know everything. I need to bring the experts in, particularly when constituents have a really important issue that they want to learn about. So in this instance, I had constituents in Spicewood who were upset about some billboards that went up. And I brought in some, and they were also concerned about some traffic accidents. So I brought in an organization that's worked on beautification of our highways. And I brought in a county commissioner and our constable, and we had a panel discussion. Go ahead to the next slide. This is the billboard that got them outraged. So here you can see a cemetery, and inside the boundary of the cemetery, Becky's put a billboard up. And so it's just, they were very unhappy to see that from the gravestones, or from the graveside site. And so we worked with TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation, to see what we could do about, once a billboard's up, you really can't force the billboard owner to take it down, but we can certainly try to keep that from happening in other cemeteries in the state of Texas. So, and I'm working with the representative who's basically next door to me in Burnett County, which also has part of Spicewood. His name is Terry Wilson, and he's actually going to file the bill that says that we can't put billboards up inside cemeteries. And so again, working with somebody who's not in my party, but it's really important to our constituents that we take on this issue. So go ahead to the next slide. So leaders are problem solvers. We have to think about what problems are we trying to solve, and what are some ways to solve these problems. And for the next part of the conversation, I really want to open it up to you and take a poll and see what you consider to be your biggest issue or something that you're really interested in. And we'll kind of focus the next part of the conversation on the results of this poll. So I'm going to give you a minute to read what the issues are and to think about what you want to talk about. Oh, and I have to look in the chat box, because if you pick other, you can put it in chat. And while everybody is filling out the poll, I see an interesting question in the chat. It says, there was a brawl between legislators at one time, a couple of years ago. What was that all about? Yes, that was the session before I came in, and that was to do with SB 4, which was termed the Show Me Your Papers bill. It was a bill that requires, it really concerns immigrants, and the requirement, if you are pulled over by a police officer, you would have to show your identification card or your papers. So they called it the Show Me Your Papers bill. It was, it basically has caused more harm to our immigrant community than help. And it was a very contentious bill. It did result in a brawl on the House floor. I was not there. When I came into office, my year, there were 12 of us Democrats who flipped seats in swing districts, and that House floor, we had a little bit more cooperation and collaboration because of the change. We had 12 more Democrats than the session before. This time around, the 2020, you may have recalled there was a big push for us to have a blue wave, for us to potentially win a majority in the Texas House. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And we basically just held on to the same number of seats. We flipped a seat in Houston, but we also lost a Democrat in the outskirts of Houston. So essentially, we are still 9 members down and the Republicans hold that majority. So it looks like paying for college is the issue that, not surprisingly, is considered the most important to y'all. So we will talk about that first, and we may get to some of the other issues as well. It looks like second place may be the policing issue, and then it looks like there's some interest in voting and access to healthcare. So yeah, we'll start with talking about paying for college and earning a living wage. So one of my bills actually is on increasing the minimum wage to $15 over a 2-year period. I'm very happy to know and hear about President Biden also taking this on as a big issue. You know, we often see how housing prices have gone up, medical care prices have gone up, and yet our salaries aren't keeping up with that. And not everybody works at minimum wage, of course, and in Central Texas, minimum wage, often employers have to pay more than that anyway just to get employees. But it's still, when you raise it, it raises everybody's wages. So would love to know what your thoughts are. And again, I'd love to make it more discussion. If anybody, you can put it in chat, or you can unmute if you would like to. So on the issue that we're discussing, what is the conservative standpoint in, let's say, free tuition or free college? What would the conservative standpoint be? What would the liberal standpoint be? And how do we meet in the middle, or how do we bridge the partisan divide on that issue? Right, so conservatives are always talking about the free market and the idea that if you're given something, you don't appreciate it, you take it for granted. So therefore, students should have to pay something, or they would just take their education for granted. Okay, that would be somewhere along the conservative viewpoint. The liberal viewpoint is education is so important. The more educated our society is, the better off we all are, right? And so we should have at least free tuition. And then the moderate might say, well, I agree that it's very important everybody have a higher education. And yet, how do we fund that? So I would love to hear some thoughts. I see someone has written, conservatives think that they shouldn't have to pay for anyone's education because it's considered a handout. Right. So oftentimes there's that argument over handout versus Handup. I was a volunteer for Austin Habitat for Humanity for a number of years, and we always said that, you know, the Habitat for Humanity model is that everybody who builds a house puts sweat equity into another house and into their own house. And so we're not giving that to them because they're still putting a lot of work into getting that house. I think the same idea, you know, if you're going to college, you're putting a lot of work in. And the end result is that you're going to be more productive in society. And so certainly, you know, we've seen models where it's worked. And the most recent model is in New York. They are paying for medical school, for students to go through medical school. So sometimes the way to bridge the partisan divide is to start off small, to start with maybe a pilot program, so that if you haven't convinced everybody on the other side that we can do this program overall for all of society, well, let's try just a small group. Let's see how that works. And I would say, actually, that's where charter schools came about, is the idea that we needed to have an incubator of innovation, which sometimes works. But in this instance, in the instance of charter schools, we've actually gotten to where we have two parallel systems that are taking money funding from the same bucket, and it's becoming problematic in current times with the explosion of the number of charter schools that there are. I want every kid to have a wonderful education, but at the same time, you know, we've seen in Austin where a number of the schools in East Austin are having to close down because their enrollment's decreasing. I think the big stumbling block, and I know how Bernie Sanders often talked about free college education. I think the big stumbling block is simply how do we pay for that for all of our students? Again, maybe you look at how do you increase exponentially the number of scholarships that we have. That way, those students who need the money to go to college can get scholarships. I know when I went to college, two things, tuition was a whole lot lower and there were a lot more grants and scholarships available. In fact, student loans back when I went to college were a lot better. The interest rates were very, very low. They were guaranteed. And I love the idea, the concept of if you become a teacher, for example, you go through college and your career route is become a teacher. And we have a need for teachers, say in rural areas, or maybe certain schools, even in urban areas where there's a lack of teachers, then perhaps your student loans can be paid off by you going where the need is greatest. To me, that's another way to accomplish the same thing in a different way. So I know medical school, the same thing. Some doctors have been enticed to go to rural areas by having their medical school loans paid off over time. So that's a way that perhaps conservatives could be more open to the idea of us paying for college education on the back end, but it does allow more students to go and not have that heavy burden of a loan that has to be paid off at a time that they're also trying to start a family or buy a home, things like that. Okay, I see another comment. They use socialism as a scare tactic on their base. Yes, and that's one of my things that I talk about quite a bit when I am talking to people about voting. It's really important to vote all the time. I know so many people will vote in the presidential elections and forgo the primaries. And that's why we've gotten to where we're so divisive. That's one of the reasons, is that when you have a very small percent of the population who vote in primaries, you're going to have those people who are most paying attention to what's going on, and they tend to be on either extreme. And so you will get your extreme candidates as a result of them having to play or speak to their base. And they do use scare tactics like socialism. Some of the postcards certainly talked about me being very liberal and being a socialist. So, you know, I just, my response to that is my number one goal is making sure that people are taken care of, whether that is healthcare or education. It serves us all when we take care of those in society. So any questions on the topic of free education? Also, I would love for y'all to get onto social media and help me promote the idea of a $15 minimum wage. You know, the more voices behind an issue, the better. And I've put out on both Twitter and Facebook some graphics that we've been using to try to get the point across. So we'd love to have you help and share that amongst your friends and family and so forth. Healthcare is probably the number one issue right now. I know with the pandemic, people oftentimes have their healthcare through their employer. And as some people lost their jobs earlier on in the pandemic, and even now, they lose the healthcare insurance that goes with that. And so healthcare right now, unfortunately, Texas is ranked number one in the number of uninsured. And so the biggest topic of conversation these days in the Capitol is how do we ensure people get the healthcare that they need? Most of us Democrats would love to see Medicaid expansion. And one of the reasons for that is if we if we expand Medicaid and let more people get into the Medicaid program, it starts out at a 90 to 10 match. So for every $10 Texas puts into the cost of care, the federal government gives us $90. So who would turn that down? You're putting down $10 to get $90 back from the federal government in order to take care of people that we're already taking care of. You know, oftentimes if someone's not able to go to a primary care doctor because they don't have health insurance, what ends up happening is their health gets worse and worse until the point where they have to go to an emergency room. That is not efficient healthcare. It's not good for the person, of course, but it's also not good for society, you know. And so that's an argument that we can use with conservatives. They want to be fiscally or why would you turn down that $90 the federal government's going to send us? All right, so let's turn to policing and public safety, because that's going to be one of the governor's big priority items, emergency items. You may have been following what's been happening here in Austin. The city council eliminated 3 cadet classes because they were problematic. They wanted to make sure that the cadets were getting the training they need to be anti-racist, basically, to not have issues with brutality towards people of color. And so in doing so, the Republicans have come up with this mantra that Democrats have defunded the police, which is not true. You know, they took away $21 million that went towards the cadet classes, but that's certainly not defunding the police. It's certainly not eliminating the police department. But the governor has made that one of his big priority items to basically punish any city that has defunded the police. And so he's working on a bill that would either say the Department of Public Safety, which is law enforcement at the state level, would take over the activities of the Austin police in certain parts of the city, and that the city of Austin would have to pay the state to do that. This is a tough issue, and actually I've reached out to a number of my Republican counterparts to get their input to see where they stand on that issue, to see if it really is going to get very far in the Texas House. Thankfully, I have not had the Republicans that I've reached out to say that they support that idea. It probably will get a hearing, but I don't think it will go very far. And I see, Jamal, you have your hand raised. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, we just had a question in the chat actually, by Blair, and it was asking, is that a legal, move? Is that something that's legal to be done?
For the governor to say that the Department of Public Safety is going to take over the Austin police activities would require legislation. So that's what he is working towards. Right now, it's not legal, but that's why he has made that one of his priority items. Being the governor, he has the power to put that on his priority list, but he can't write legislation. He can't either a House member or a senator, and it has to go through the process of being approved both in the House and the Senate, and then going before him to be signed into law. And that's a lot. So it really, the way the legislature is set up, it's much easier to kill a bill than it is to get a bill passed. Like I said, I don't think it's likely that we'll see any takeover of the Austin police by the Department of Public Safety. There's so many arguments against it. In fact, the DPS has a lot of roles besides law enforcement. As you probably know, DPS is in charge of driver's licenses, and I'm on the committee that oversees that agency. I'm on the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee. And during session last year, we heard a lot of complaints from people who are having to wait a really long time when they go to DPS. And so they actually consider taking that function away from DPS and moving it to DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles within the counties, because DPS simply can't handle it. Another piece that they've been having a hard time is the forensic labs. And so right now we're seeing that DPS has more on its plate than it can handle. So it just simply doesn't make sense to have them take over the Austin police. Jamal, is there another question?
Oh, for sure. Your chat's blowing up here. I believe one of the statements earlier was about retraining police and not so much defunding, but finding better ways to retrain officers. And then we have another question here, which was earlier something that you had talked about, which is having changes to a bill to get passed. What do these changes look like? And as a civic leader, how do you decide what to change while trying to remain true to what you originally intended for the bill?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me take that one first. So a bill starts out as just an idea. I want to, let me talk about one actually that I'm working on. Every state agency goes through this process called Sunset, where the Sunset Commission reviews that agency and determines how they could improve or whether it should simply go away, sunset. And so one of the agencies that just went through that process is the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. We call it TCOL. And again, that agency is overseen by the committee that I'm on, Homeland Security. One of the issues that came out is that TCOL really doesn't have any teeth to it. And it's not really very good at overseeing the police departments or the law enforcement agencies in the state. They have every single police department or law enforcement agency, which includes sheriffs and constables as well. So one of the things that's happened, they call it gypsy cops, where you have a police officer who maybe does handle something incorrectly, they're brutal, they brutalize somebody, and they are about to get fired by their agency. Instead, they resign, and then they go off, apply it in a different city, in a different police department, and get rehired. So that's kind of what is known in the law enforcement world as the gypsy cop. So right now that happens because if they resign, they don't have to fill out an F5 form. Whereas if they are fired because of their actions, the next department will read their F5 form that kind of describes what they've done. So my bill will require that every officer who leaves the department has to fill out this form, regardless of whether they resign or they're fired. And the hope is that the next department will see the F5 form and they'll have the whole background and know that this is not someone they want to hire. So that's how my bill is going to start out. As it goes through committee, where I feel certain somebody's going to say, well, this part of it isn't going to work. We need to change it somehow. And so we work with the different entities that will be affected by the bill to try to make it something that will work. And obviously, if it ends up changing it so that it doesn't achieve the goal, then there's not really any point in going forward with it and accepting an amendment. So that's what myself and other legislators have to make that determination. Is this change to my bill something that, well, it's still going to accomplish what I want it to accomplish? Or does it just change it so much it's not worth it and we try again next session? And I'll be honest, I forgot the first question that you asked me.
I actually think you got to the first question, which was how do you make those changes and what makes you think through those changes for your bills? And also just being a civic leader, like, why would you do that? But what is those things that makes you have to change it, even when it goes beyond what you originally intended? Like, what is that process for you mentally when that happens?
Yeah, legislation's a funny thing. I mean, there are times when I think, well, nobody could possibly be against this bill. It just makes so much sense. It's a real easy thing. And then as soon as you file it, you find out there are people that have a different point of view. on just about every issue. So it's a constant learning process that after El Paso shooting last year and the Midland Odessa shooting, we had even the lieutenant governor say it just doesn't make sense for people to be able to sell guns to strangers, right? That's what happened in the Midland Odessa shooting. And so my bill would require every gun sale or every gun transfer to go through a background check, which that's a safety measure. It shouldn't be that controversial, and yet I know that we'll have strong opposition. I also have a bill that would not allow people to openly show their guns at a protest. Right now, interestingly, if you're at the Capitol for a rally and you have a sign, you cannot have a wooden stake attached to the sign if it's more than 12 inches, which is, you know, the length of a ruler. So I was at a rally at the Capitol many years ago and was holding my sign with the wooden stake. And I had DPS officers come up to me and tell me I had to take the wooden stake off. And I asked them why. The answer was that it could be used against somebody. But the crazy thing is, I could have had a gun, a rifle, that my sign was attached to, and that would be legal. And so I just think it's wrong to have guns showing at a protest. You're at a protest to express a point of view, and there's typically going to be a counter to your point of view. And if you see a gun across the way, that's going to have a chilling effect on your freedom of speech. And so again, I filed that bill, and I'm sure I will get a lot of pushback on that from the Second Amendment folks who just believe you should be able to have a gun no matter what. Anyway.
I did not know that. That just threw me for a loop. And we got a lot of people in the chat also, thrown for a loop there as well. Did have a question that was earlier on in this conversation. I think we want to also get back to this conversation as well about, firearms and the Second Amendment stuff. That's a really good topic to stick with. But an earlier question was around minimum wage and around what does that look like? And what about raising the minimum wage for tipped employees? Because I believe some of that is still a very crucial topic and a crucial moment. So what do you think about that? Like, how would that work into your bills?
Yeah, so my bill has the minimum wage going up to $15 in 2 years. So the rationale is that it gives employers an opportunity to figure out their budgets in the first year. There's going to be a lot of pushback. The Texas Association of Business is not in favor. They believe in the free market. And so it's not going to be an easy bill. In past years, I filed a bill last time around to increase the minimum wage, and being a freshman Democrat, I didn't get my bill in time for it to have a hearing because there were 5 other representatives who had similar bills that did get hearings. And so they had already had those hearings early on in session. I think this time around, it might get a little bit more momentum behind it because President Biden is pushing the same idea at a federal level. But the counter argument is always that you're going to cause more unemployment when you raise the wages. My argument is that's not necessarily true, because when you pay somebody more, particularly someone who's working at minimum wage, they're going to spend that money. They're going to spend that money in the economy and generate the need for more jobs. So it's a positive circular momentum, as opposed to the negative of keeping it low where people can't pay their rent or buy food or see a doctor. And so we've got to raise the minimum wage. It's just the right thing to do morally and economically. And as far as the tipped wage, my bill would increase the tipped wage to, I believe it's 50% of the minimum wage. So $7 an hour once it hits 15. It's, to me, just really crazy that tipped wage is still at $2 and something cents. That's what it was when I was working as a waitress a long time ago. So, you know, I think there was an article in the New York Times just today or yesterday about the tipped wage. And so we're going to try to push out that message as well, that we've really got to increase wages and tipped wages for sure.
Yeah, one other question that just came through, and I'm man, we got a lot of questions. But one was, what avenues would you suggest for someone who wants to get involved in politics or social change?
There are lots of organizations that work either on campaigns or issues. And my suggestion is to first get involved with an organization that shares your values, whether it's, I see somebody wrote in here, run for something. There's organizations that help women run for office, like Annie's List or Emily's List. There's one that's working to get the Latina and Latino communities to vote, which is called JOLT. There's environmental groups like the Environmental Defense Fund. There's so many different organizations. There's a Students Demand Action for the on an issue or somebody or a candidate's campaign. You'll learn a lot about how the process works. You know, running for office is a lot of getting out and knocking on doors in a normal campaign year. This year, we didn't do that too much, but having conversations with people, learning how you raise money. You know, I hate the fact that we have so much money in politics, and that's something else that I'd love to work on is putting more limits on what can be spent on campaigns, because it's daunting to many people. And I think a lot of people don't run for office when they hear how much a candidate before them has had to spend to get into office. You know, it's millions of dollars to run for a statewide office like Beto did. Beto's got an amazing organization, and he's worked over the years to add to his database, to have those volunteers throughout the entire state. And that's what you have to do to run statewide. In my district, I represent about 190,000 people. I had 65,000 votes or close to it in the election, and my opponent, we were only about 3,000 votes apart. So not, or 1,300 rather. So it was close, but not as close as Donna Howard. One year when she ran, she had 4 votes more than her opponent. So every vote is so important. And working on someone's campaign, that's what I did. Wendy Davis was one of the campaigns that I worked on. Bernie Sanders, I volunteered for him as well as a block walker. And it got me exposed to knocking on strangers' doors and having conversations with them face to face. And I think once you've done that, once you've had that experience, you'll know whether that's something you can do yourself as a candidate or not. And again, I think there's so many different roles for different people. There's a lot of people who come to the Capitol as advocates, and they become experts in a certain area that they're passionate about, and then they come and they testify at the Capitol and make a huge difference. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the organization that Wendy Davis started called Deeds Not Words, but they provide students from UT oftentimes who come up to the Capitol and testify on bills, and they're fantastic. All right, Jamal, you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna keep spanning the questions to you. So we got a couple minutes left. Of course, it's 3:23. We're gonna go to 3:30. So we're gonna try to press as much as we can and get as many answers as we possibly can. But I appreciate you for sharing your knowledge with us, and I'm pretty sure the students and the people in the space are also appreciative of this. Some of this is super eye-opening for anyone in the spot. First question that I saw here that was interesting was going back to some of the minimum wage conversation, that they like the idea of the $15 per hour, but that might affect small businesses a little bit differently when it comes to being able to actually provide that to their employees. Will there be something for them to apply for? And thinking in reference to what's happening right now with COVID, is there something that small businesses can apply for? And then we have another question, just 2 separate ideas. I know it's two rings. The other question was, is there talk about revising the Texas Constitution? So first question being about what a small businesses can do to try to match and give that amount of money to employees. Then that second one is Texas talking about revising its constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a small business owner, and I understand, you know, it is tough thinking about if I raise the salary, how do I make this work? Small business owners are always having to go through that. Maybe I cut down on my advertising budget. Maybe I raise my prices. You know, that whether the minimum wage goes up or not, small business owners always have those decisions to make about how they raise their revenue and how they spend it. So they can always get a loan, and especially right now, there's the PPP loans that have helped a lot of my friends who are small business owners. They were a little bit challenging to get in the beginning, and then the federal government sent more money to the states through the PPP program. And so ultimately, I think a lot of businesses were helped by that. If we weren't in pandemic times, how would small businesses handle it? I would just say, you know, that's the great thing about small businesses and entrepreneurs is they're very creative. We're very creative. You know, you will come up with ways to do it. And like I said, when you're paying higher wages, that means more disposable income of your employees, who in turn are going to go and spend that money. So it's just a positive circle of business, right? The other was about the Constitution. How do you change the Constitution? Actually, we change the Texas Constitution all the time. We, in fact, in 2019, we had an election in November that had 7-ish propositions on it that changed the Texas Constitution. One of them was against having an income tax. I don't know if any of y'all voted in the 2019 elections, but so your odd year elections tend to be more focused on constitutional amendments, and turnout is really super low. Again, I encourage people to vote every time, and you can always find out what's on your ballot by using the League of Women Voters website, which is vote website that when you plug in your address, it'll tell you who and what you can vote on and give you both sides of an issue. They're nonpartisan, and so they don't recommend one position or another. They don't recommend candidates. They just give some really good information to base your decisions on. And so we do update the Constitution all the time. One of the propositions on the ballot in 2019 was whether law enforcement officials could own the animals that they had been working with. So apparently it was in our Constitution previously that they couldn't, upon retirement of the animals, they couldn't take ownership of them. And so I think we had like 94% of the voters voted in favor of that. And so it just kind of makes you wonder what the other 6% were thinking.
I know this is probably complete opposite of everything that we had planned, but I think this is going really well with seeing what our chat is saying and seeing how they're approaching this conversation. And I had a question for you, which I think would get at the process that we were talking about at the beginning. What does it really take to bridge that gap? It's a pretty big divide right now in our country, especially moving forward. What do you think is some tools that our students that are here who might always encounter this either at home or in their workplace, what can they do to kind of bridge those communications?
You know, it really is all about building relationships. If you have a relationship with somebody and they have a different opinion than you, you can have a conversation with them and say, here's why I believe this way, and tell me why you believe that way. And maybe you'll sway them. You know, maybe they had never thought about it. I know oftentimes we think they're so far apart, the people who are doing, let's just take Marjorie Greene because she's so far, right? She's the woman who is basically a QAnon believer in the Congress right now. You know, that's a very extreme example. Most Congress people, most legislators aren't that extreme. And so by having a relationship, I'll give an example. So Candy Noble is a Republican from North Texas. And last year when we were working on school finance reform, they were going to add in the ability for more preschoolers to go to a full day pre-K program. And her opinion was that, well, preschoolers don't need to go to full day pre-K. After noon, all they're going to do is have more recess and naps. And I said, well, the point in having a full day pre-K is because so many of the parents aren't able to logistically get their kid to pre-K if it's not full, take their kids to a part-time daycare, preschool program. And so she had that idea had not occurred to her. And I changed her mind just by having that conversation with her. So it's just having conversations, building relationships. And I want to tell you one more thing, one more tradition that we have in the legislature. You can see behind me, I've got a picture of the Capitol. And on that picture, I've got the signatures of probably about 80% of the other legislators. So when we go around desk to desk and get all of our fellow legislators to sign our Capitol picture, and then that's our kind of a memento from that session. But we have Republicans and Democrats alike, and we really do get along socially. And we don't always see eye to eye, but we have respect for one another, and that's what it takes, you know, having respect and building relationships.
So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you giving us that information. I appreciate you sharing everything, you know, in this time frame. And again, I know it's a bit of a twist from all the stuff that was happening, but we were getting some really good comments, really good, you know, conversation happening in the chat. And we didn't want you to miss that because they were really engaged into what you were saying and wanted to know more, and wanted to feed as much as they can from what you were able to give in. So I appreciate that. And I know if you see the chat right now, you look at what's happening, people are appreciating you and loving that they had the chance to be able to talk with you. With that being said, is there anything else that you want to just end the day off with? Anything else you want to spill to the folks before we move them on into the next space?
Yeah, I would just tell you that don't ever let anyone tell you you can't do it. Whatever you aspire to do, you can do it.